What will you do when it finally happens? It's not a question of if anymore, but when and where and how bad will it be. Hi, my name is Dr. Carl Simononik. I know the field of radiation protection, and I'd like to teach you how to cope with nuclear worst-case scenarios too. Everything I'm offering you here is free, so let me tell you a little bit about myself and what I can teach you. My training in radiation biology began with coursework and practical research experience at Florida State University, where I applied what I learned there to write a book titled Anti-Nuclear Nutrition and subtitled Background and Principles for Reducing the Internal Radiation Dose After Nuclear Contamination or Nuclear Disaster. This was written for my master's degree in nutrition. It is both a general text on the fundamental principles of radiation biology and a specialized volume about protecting yourself against internal emitters, that is, against radiation exposures from radionuclides entering your body through air, food, and water. Anti-Nuclear Nutrition is your textbook for this course, and it's freely downloadable when you register for my free NukeWar Radiation Protection email course. After I got my master's in nutrition at Florida State, I went to UC Davis on the other side of the country to get my PhD in physiology, where I took more coursework to earn a minor degree in radiation biology, which, as is common in graduate school, sometimes included teaching the subject. Earlier at Florida State, I had worked hands-on with radioactive materials in a laboratory doing sex hormone radioimmunoassays, and at UC Davis, I gained more hands-on experience working with radioactive materials on a daily basis in a physiology research laboratory studying the microcirculation. One of the things you learn when you work with radioactive materials is how easy it is for them to get spread out all over the place accidentally. And the history of radiation biology includes many incidents of radioactive materials spreading through the environment and into people in the aftermaths of nuclear bomb testing, the nuclear attacks on Japan, nuclear fuel cycle waste emissions, and the numerous nuclear accidents that have occurred in the United States and around the world. The future history of these kinds of events is what I want to teach you to understand and protect yourself from. For me, it's highly personal. My father claimed the dubious distinction of being the first man to willingly fly an airplane into the mushroom cloud of an atomic explosion to collect bomb debris samples. And the VA later denied his radiation-related health claims. Imagine that. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was just a child living at Homestead Air Force Base, which, if the conflict had escalated, would have been one of the first places hit by Russian atomic missiles. Little did I know at the time how helpless I would have been. And in my early 20s, I was inadvertently exposed to reactor waste in a minor nuclear accident. Later on in college, learning about the many nuclear contamination events that have occurred in the United States and around the world led to my developing a social conscience about nuclear power and weapons, sufficient to get myself arrested for protesting at the Nevada test site. So you can see how I have been soaked in and taught and written about radiation biology and associated nuclear topics for years, the most important elements of which I'm now dedicated to teaching you. You'll learn about basic radiation principles like atomic structure, radioactive decay, and what exactly is radiation anyway. You'll learn about half-lives, decay chains, and units of measure for radiation. With that base of knowledge, then we'll get into the good stuff about biological effects, including the important differences between internal and external radiation sources. We'll talk about how radiation damages biomolecules, radiation effects on cells, how large doses of radiation can kill you, and the after effects of radiation exposure called late effects that can affect you when you survive. I'll teach you about sources of radiation exposure, starting with natural background radiation and minor man-made sources used in medicine and research, in industry and accelerators, and in consumer products. We'll talk about the nuclear fuel industry, which most people know little about, starting with mining and milling of uranium, enrichment, fuel fabrication, nuclear power reactors, reprocessing, transportation issues, and nuclear waste. And we'll talk a fair amount about nuclear weapons. Then we'll talk about the major radionuclides of concern, meaning those radioactive elements that are most likely to get into your body where they will do the most damage. You'll learn about their pathways into you, like inhalation, skin absorption, penetration through wounds, and ingestion in food and water. Also how the food chains for these materials can be terrestrial or aquatic. On this base of knowledge, I'll teach you protection principles, the value of planning ahead, time considerations, and what you need to know to protect yourself against external sources of radiation. Then we'll get to protection from internal radiation sources, beginning with general principles for reducing exposures via the different pathways mentioned before: inhalation, skin absorption, wound contamination, and especially the ingestion pathway. Finally, we'll cover in some detail the specific radionuclides of concern, those most likely to get into your body. These boil down to radioiodines, radiostrontium, radiocesium, and the actinide elements like uranium and plutonium. We'll talk about the sources of each, a little bit about their chemistry, their critical organs, and strategies for protecting yourself against them. When you are done with this course, you will know what you need to do if there is a nuclear war or other horrific radiation contamination event, and you will have my book, Anti-Nuclear Nutrition, to use for a reference. Please print it out after registering so that you have a hard copy to refer to if power becomes unavailable. It's only 201 pages long and might save your life or at least improve your quality of life in a post-nuclear world. If you take it to a copy shop, they can print it and bind it into a real book for you. Please share copies with your friends and family and refer them to my course so they can learn what they need to know too. In this day and age, remember, it's no longer about if, but when, where, and how bad will it be. So please register right now if you haven't already.